You had more energy. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Brad Caskey, and I serve as the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to today's Provost Forum, presented by Dr. Jason Heaton, Associate Professor. Ooh, someone got a boo. I like that. Associate Professor of Biology who joined Birmingham Southern College faculty ranks in 2010. Dr. Heaton's academic credentials include both a BA and BS from University of South Alabama and an MA and PhD from Indiana University, Bloomington. In 2017, Jason was the recipient of the R.G. McWilliams Faculty Scholarship Award. Some of Dr. Heaton's areas of scholarly interest include hominid paleontology, evolutionary species and theory, experimental archaeology, and Africa. The title of today's provocative presentation is The Ape Within, How Modern Anatomy Reflects Our Evolutionary Past and Present. Please join me with a warm welcome for Dr. Heaton.
All right, so let's hope that we're not all disappointed, because I'm not sure what I'm going to say on some of these slides, so we'll see. I was going to say something, so when I had to get this title a couple of months ago, we had to get one before the academic calendar was laid out. I thought, well, I'll do something called The Ape Within and do something with anatomy. And I realized as I started putting this talk together, that's probably not the best title for what I'm going to talk about, so I changed it a little bit. It's new and improved. It's life lessons I've learned from ape men. So, and before I get started, I forgot to tell, the student who parked in faculty parking in Stevens in the blue Toyota Corolla, you left your lights on. And I may have keyed your car on the way in as I was driving around trying to find my parking space. So, I don't know if this is going to work because I really want to move and I don't know if I can stand behind this. Yeah, okay, I'll try that. So whenever I'm talking about things that are interested in me, I think about the past. And so when we talk about the past, that means different things to each one of us. Some of you are interested in history, and some of you are interested in art. We all think about life events, so perhaps a recent achievement, and that is me and my family are all black belts now. My wife actually is attending my talk, and it's kind of making it worse. And I care about their opinion, not that I don't care about yours, but and that's me as a baby rocking that little Havana Cuban t-shirt or shirt, whatever else. We also think about vacations, perhaps time we've spent with loved ones, people that we spend time with that make us want to be better people, or people that we've lost. And so for each one of us, we think about the past in different ways, but what we don't oftentimes realize is you look around the room and you see people that look quite different from you, behave differently than you. But the thing is we all share a common past. The problem is we talk in big terms of numbers. And so one of the things I did a couple of years ago is I simply said, well, where am I from? And we do these genetic tests. You've probably seen it on Ancestry or 23andMe. And you put some saliva in a vial, and you send it off and get back. And I thought, well, this will be interesting. What am I genetically made up of? Well, 99.3% European. So it's kind of disappointing. But then the problem is that's only the recent past, and we start thinking about it a little bit further, and we move back, and we find some interesting results. If we go back and we think about 180,000 years ago, all of us, doesn't matter who in this room, we can trace our ancestry back to parts of Africa. So that's what's shown in this little panel here. And my most recent mitochondrial DNA ancestor split off to the Middle East, places like Syria and Iraq. And so we have to start going back in time to think about how we're all connected one to another. And so we talk about big numbers all the time. We have that's 20 trillion. The Big Bang happened 13.7 billion years ago. Or what I'm going to talk about, we evolved from an ape 6 to 8 million years ago. When we think about those numbers all the time, we really don't think about what that number means. How big is that number? And so what I want to do is use this dot to represent all of us. So if we look in this room, we have many generations of people here, but if we take the average generation in modern humans, it's roughly about 30 years. Okay, so between each generation. And so what I want to do is put some historical events and prehistoric events in the terms of the numbers of generations since these things can happen, so that you can understand how far it's been back in time. Instead of saying millions of years, we'll talk about generations between some of these events. Now, here you are. So at the very top. And don't let anybody fool you, size matters, scale matters. And so this is us, from the very top. Now, if we start talking about events, and again, these are just rough estimations. Around 3 generations ago, we start having abstract expressions. And then we move to 5 generations ago, with the founding of BSC, around the same time as Darwin's On the Origin of Species in the 1850s. Then in the late 1700s, we have the French Revolution. And then again, I'm joking, so I'm sure historians are thinking, well, there's a lot of stuff in between these. So I'm just trying to show you some events that mark our sort of historic past. When we talk about history, we're talking about things since the written language. Then we move to the Taj Mahal, which was finished in the 1600s, 13 generations ago. Then Genghis Khan began his conquest of Mongolia 27 generations ago. Then the bubonic plague, the first time it was ever recorded, was called the Plague of Justinian. And it was so devastating that in the first 2 years of that plague, 13% of the world's population died. And by the time it ended 200 years later, 25% of the world's population died. So that's what I'm trying to show you is that even though we only think about our recent past, all of our ancestors have lived through many of these events. And if you think about it, it goes back until the Big Bang. We're talking about all of this time that we existed was something that gave rise to what's existed. Then we jump even further, so we're going from 1,500 years ago to now 75 generations ago, where Archimedes begins to talk about his approximation of pi. 81 generations ago, we have Plato, another Greek philosopher. Then we're making a big jump to Sumerian. We begin to have the first phonetic language. You begin to see right. They're essentially small cuneiform, as they would make this clay with these wedge-shaped tools. And so if you look across the top, you see that you're still here at the very top. But all of those generations, everything you can think of that you've learned, any historical fact, any figure, all of that's taken place within those 184 generations. Okay? So to me, that's not much time, because I have a different perspective on the depth of time. And so, again, it's pretty amazing. So about 6,000 years is the earliest recording we have of written language. Now, the other thing that precedes that is another significant movement that allows us to do the other things that we do. We start living in one place, and we start farming. We start domesticating animals. And the earliest place that occurs is in what's called the Fertile Crescent, old Mesopotamia. So these places where they begin to settle down, they begin to farm, rather than hunting and gathering. You go out and you catch whatever you can catch, and you collect whatever you can collect. They're now relying on the environment to give them something for subsistence. And so it starts, and then you see these arrows, that's called diffusion. And that's what makes us great, because we share a lot of ideas. We share things between different cultures, and then we get ideas of perhaps better ways to do things that we've done before. And so again, that's only happened 333 generations ago. One of the things I want you to do, and it's not very long, is if you think about, because I'm one of those patriotic people, I love where I'm at in the United States. I've been to other countries, I know there's benefits to other countries and benefits to here. But you oftentimes don't realize how much of what we think of as America, the things we do in your day-to-day life, are borrowed from other places. So this was written kind of as a joke in 1937, but you can go on the internet and find it. It's just called 100% American. Just put it in the you can find this. And it talks about all these different things that we borrow, this fusion of ideas. And again, that's what makes us sort of beneficial and able to adapt in new ways, because we're sharing these ideas and experiences with the groups. But how far do we have to go back until we start finding things that look like us, but may not behave like us? So the first species, Homo sapiens, the same thing we're in. Again, you can tell that we named ourselves because we named ourselves wise men. Homo sapiens translates that. And so if you look at this is an Ethiopia. And that little dot that we had at the very top is representing 30 years. In order to go back this many generations, we have to go about 6,700 generations just to get back to the first thing that looks like us, to any of us. But that's not even close to what I'm interested in, the parts that I say. Because I get these questions during talk. People always ask me, when you can tell me about the Tufians and the Fertile Crescent, I'm like, oh, that's it's only like 3 million years different from where I'm sitting. I can talk a little bit about it. There are certain things that, is way beyond my time here. And so I'm trying to get you to grasp the idea. Instead of just saying millions of years, everybody just kind of writes that off. We don't think really how much time that is. And then if you look, so what I'm interested in, this is a modern human. And this is a Neanderthal, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and these things that I like to call ape-men, just because it's a good explanation. It's one of these things that's part us and part things that we descended from. And in order to go back in that period of time, we're looking at this transitional period, the stuff that I'm interested in, between 3.5 to 2 million years. There's lots of things going on in our evolution during that time. And if we think about the numbers of generations, it's 100,000 generations between us and that little ape man, the site that I worked with. Okay? And we're not even talking about, if you look at that little orange and barely see it there, that is all of history. So stuff that we study, that are people, places, or things, is all on those two little lines right there, essentially. It's 184 generations. And so when I look at this, it kind of blows my mind. And trust me, as I was putting these slides together, I was regretting it because I was having to count some of these dots to make sure that I was correct, because I want to make sure that I'm as scientific as possible. And so when I'm doing these other slides here, I was counting those dots to make sure there really were 6,700 dots on the slide. This one, I just took the computer's word for it. I just said, not going to do it, not going to count it. And so, again, if we talk about this, these APEs, I'll talk about them. And again, I'm talking about human evolution in a broad sense. If you guys enjoy it or don't enjoy my talk, I'll give it another one in February, so you'll either avoid it or you can come to it as well. I'll talk more specific details about what I did on my sabbatical. This is just kind of a warm up on this. But if we're interested in things that go back before this time period, things that are, again, getting in that ape-like direction, we have to go an additional 3 to 4 million years. That means taking this and making a copy of it almost to the floor. So that many generations. So whenever people talk about evolution takes time, it does take time for these events to happen, for changes to take place. Okay. So my work is taking place in South Africa, in a place that's called the cradle of humankind. And I grew up in North Alabama and had no intention of going to college. My mother had a 9th grade education. My dad didn't even finish his senior year in high school. And so I got out and started working in the factory. And got interested in medicine and those things, perhaps like some of you. And then got into college and had to take an anthropology course, and it just blew my mind that I can actually make these things. And so by accident, I got connected with somebody in South Africa and began doing work there. So if you were interested, I've taken students to South Africa with me over the summer to do research. The last couple of years, I've taken one student each summer, one month like that, because I think it does change your worldview when you move somewhere or go somewhere for a short period of time and see things that are completely different and contrasted in many ways to the way you live. And so I work out here in this area. That little square box is what this right side of the figure is showing. And these sites are all well-known sites. Sterkfontein is one of the most important sites in human paleontology, and I'll tell you why in a second. And I've spent time looking at SWARTKRANS as well for 8 years, and they're literally just across the street from each other. And all these other sites sample time periods around that 3.5 to 2 million year old range. So when we go from ape-men to something in our own genes, something inside a farm. And so just to show you, this is a picture of me taken, 10 years ago. I realized as I'm putting my talk together, I've been going there 17 years, and I have maybe 5 photos of myself, because I'm always taking pictures of everybody else. So it's hard to find them. But this one illustrates how close these sites are one to another. So I'm standing on scaffolding in Sterkfontein. And then this has been excavated. It was found in 1934, and then it's been excavated at continuously since 1966. Generation after generation, paleontologists have worked at the site. And then SWARTKRANS is across the road in that cluster of trees. And they sample 2 time periods on that side of the thing that I'm interested in, that tree. So roughly 3 million year old material here, so greater than 2. And then over here, largely 2 million. And we end up with different species. We have ape-men at one site, and then we have things that are more directly inside of our lineage. And SWARTKRANS is also important because we used to think of evolution. I get this question all the time. If there are apes, and we evolved from apes, why are there still apes? But that misunderstands that everything must evolve into the thing that follows. And it doesn't work that way. Things split. And so in SWARTKRANS, it was one of the first places in the 1950s where they found evidence of 2 fossil human species that lived at the same time. So you had something that was directly an ancestor to us, and then something that was going to go eventually extinct, as you see. Okay. Now, this is just a picture to show you some of the sort of the scale. And when I gave my talk in February, Sarah Catherine Murphy, I don't know if she's in here somewhere or not, but we this summer took a GoPro and I flew a drone over the site to give pictures over the site and everything else like that, so you can actually see the scale of the excavations here and everything else. And just to show you, they put up scaffolding because when we excavate, we need to know how far deep we are so that we know how related this specimen is to something else, even though it's context. And she took this picture of me just so you can see how deep the excavations are. So this is me on this part of the scaffolding, and the deep part is on the other side. And we're missing about 10 or 15 feet. So we're excavating far back in time, and we even have caves that go underneath this about 60 feet. So we're working different parts of the site at different time periods so that we can get a better understanding of how the fossils are making it into the site, and also their evolution, how they're changing from one age of the site to other periods within the site. And so one of the common misconceptions we have, and a lot of people, and again, I grew up in North Alabama, would have said after high school, evolution is stupid, it doesn't make sense, the whole question of if there's apes, why are we still here, that kind of stuff. Then I started looking at evidence myself. But you have to think about the time period that most people are, when they struggle with evolution past, 5 generations ago before Darwin published on the origin of the species, the only fossils we had were Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal. If you look at those, you could pass those people on the street, and you probably wouldn't think much about them looking that different from you. And so it wasn't until you got to South Africa that somebody started looking for fossils. And so since I was in college, this is the number of species that we have named today. And some of these may be sort of subspecies who belong to the same group because there's a difference in science whether they like to lump things together, if they look similar, or whether they split it. And humans are very good at categorizing things. We love putting things in categories. But just to illustrate how fast our knowledge in my field is growing, here's the current list. All of those things shown in green are things that have been identified and discovered since I was an undergraduate. And we're adding to our knowledge and beginning to fill in these gaps of us. So when somebody says there's no transitional fossils, they're being misleading. There's transitional fossils. And then whenever somebody says, well, there's gaps in the record, well, the point is when you find one species, now you've created 2 gaps on each side of it. And then you find another species that fits in that place, now you've created 2 gaps outside of that. And so we're finding more information about our own evolution, but it's pretty recent. South Africa's role in this was in 1924, just by chance. So in North Alabama, we have limestone caves. Same thing in South Africa. You have these caves full of lime. And people were finding gold there. That's the only reason Johannesburg's there. They'll eat gold, the gold city, because they started finding gold. And as they started to find that, they realized as you get outside Johannesburg, the soil is not as good or doesn't have gold in high concentrations. So they needed to find ways to get the gold out of the soil. And one of the things we do is they take lime, and they would do this process called the McWilliams process, and they would be able to get the gold out of it using lime. So they were going into these caves and blowing stuff up and then finding fossils by chance. And somebody found a fossil baboon and sent it to an economist in Johannesburg. He looked at it and said, hey, if you find a little fossil, send it to me. Well, around Christmas of that year, 1924, they sent him this fossil. We call it the Tong Child. And it was mainly just part of a face that was exposed there. And we're lucky because, again, 1924, so less than 100 years ago, we found the first APE-LIKE. So the amount of time we're talking about this. The interesting thing is, Raymond Dart, the person who found the Tong Child, was a neuroanatomist. And so whenever he carved this out, he used this wife's knitting device, knitting needles and everything else, he started splitting this bone and separating it from the stone around it, and he found its brain. So this is actually a cast of its brain. You can see the vessels, you can see the markings and the lobes, and he realized that this was not a chimp brain, this was a human brain. It wasn't accepted for a long time because we had an idea that modern humans probably originated in Europe, or they originated in Asia, places where you find old cultures, and again, because of racism during the period as well. And so whenever he separated out the jaw, he realized that, wait a minute, these are human teeth. And so for the longest time, it was not accepted that this was actually something that was ancestral to us. And until 1936 at Sterfontein, they found an adult form of it. It doesn't look like much, but we have more specimens now. As you can see, the teeth is all distorted. These things preserve in odd ways. In February, I'll talk about the field called taxonomy, how we find fossils in the cave and how they're formed. And so you can see it's broken and distributed. As you can see, it's grain as well. So we started amassing this collection of all of these things that had ape-like characteristics, but they were sort of related to us. And so then we had to come around and say, well, how is it that we know this specimen in particular is in our lineage and it's not a baby? Because when you look at a baby chimp, it looks just like this. It looks very human-like. And as they grow to be adult, it looks less like this. Okay, so you can understand how that may be confusing around time. So what we do is we take the skull, we take a chimp here. You can see this is a famous fossil called misplaced. They love to give these things cute little names, and they're noisy because everybody remembers Lucy. You may not know the species name, but everyone knows Lucy. One I'm working on that I'll talk about in February is called Littlefoot. It was one of the bones, the first one they found was one of the foot bones. And so this is misplaced. And you can see that comparatively, innocent brain is much larger, but it's missing its teeth. So that's one of the things. We never find these things in great preservation. We find bits and pieces. I've taken students for field schools, and we've excavated for 6 weeks, and we find one tooth. Or sometimes we don't find any tooth. So it's a rarity to find, rarity between fossils. So when we look at it, you can see, well, there's some similarities between them. They have a pragmatic face that's also sticking out. You have a brain size that's not like ours, that's more like a chimp. And then we start looking at characteristics. And some of you have probably seen this slide before, where you have a fronted magnum. So that is where your spinal cord exits. It's a good indication of how an animal moves around. I do this in my eco courses, and I'm doing this in our Sample Southern class tomorrow, just to have people hands-on experience so they can come up with these answers for themselves. But when you look at something that walks as a quadruped, so on all fours, it has a fronted magnum that's further back on its skull. And the reason is because you're walking this direction, your eyes don't need to point downward, you have to point forward. So your spinal cord comes out at a different angle. So if you look at this is an angle the spinal cord is exiting the chimpanzee, and ape-men is directly below. Okay? It's because we're starting to walk upright. We're not walking into a verb or anything else like that. We're walking so that we're balancing our head directly on top of our spinal cord. Now there are other characteristics too. So we don't just find one piece of evidence and say this is something that's ancestral to us. We find many pieces of evidence. So when we look at, say for example, on the left-hand side, an animal that climbs, a chimpanzee, you can see characteristics that might, for some of you, tell you that it's a climber. It has really long arms compared to its legs. Okay? Because if you're brachiating in the tree, you're really not using your legs that much. So they have long arms relative to legs. Horse is built for running. And so when we look at structures, one of the things we want to look at is the shoulder. How do you tell if something's a climber based upon the shoulder? And so what you see is, if all of you sitting here feel across your back, you'll feel this kind of bony ridge that goes across your back. That's your shoulder blade. That's a structure called the scapular spine. So that's what this blue line is showing on this specimen. And you can see that, wait a minute, that's where the humerus fits. It's a structure called the glenoid fossa. If you've ever seen a chimp, and you can try this yourself, whenever they hang from one arm, they hang straight up and down. Because their glenoid fossa is facing more cranial because they're fibers. When we do it, because ours have changed, we hang like this. Because our shoulders adapting to using tools, not just climbing. And so if we start to look at ours, you can see there's the scapular spine. It's facing more out to the side, so our humerus. We're one of the few animals with shoulders. I don't know if you've thought about that before. We have wide shoulders and things like that. There's the way that this shoulder blade is placed on our body. One of the things that gives away the fact that this is a climbing animal is how big the body this is. So these are the same orientation. So this is where the humerus would sit. And you can see on the horse, the very bottom of it is very small. Animals that climb have a scapula that is very long from top to bottom. Okay? So even though you don't climb anymore, you take your scapula, you look at it, and it kind of tells you that at one point your ancestors were climbers. And then once we started using tools, this, you can see here's the chimp, that's where the humerus attaches, so the humerus are up here, it's like they have no shoulders, no neck. It changes over time, and we find these ape-men beginning to move in that new direction. So around 3 million years, this is what our shoulder blade will look like. We're starting to use tools, and moving our arms around. And then this kind of configuration is what makes us great at throwing. Okay? So having a humerus that's attached to the side of the body rather than on the top of that. So there's many of these characteristics, and I can keep going for days on these characteristics, but I'm just giving you a sample. The other thing is if we're balancing our head on top of our legs, not distributed on 4 limbs, we have to find a way to put that leg underneath. So that when you pick up one leg, you can balance yourself. Okay? Now what we do is, if you look at us, you can see that we have something called a valgus femur. It means it's inward facing, kind of knock knee compared to chimps. You look at a chimp, and their femur is essentially straight up and down. And if we were to study this, we would measure the angles of all of these and everything else. And when we look at ape-men, they're kind of somewhere in between. So what we're seeing is that evolution is mosaic. The fact that bits and pieces are changing at different times. It's not all that we appear modern at one single point. As we have walking on 2 feet is first, our shoulder begins to change, and then later our brain changes. So these bits and pieces are added to this totality of what it is to be human. But why is it? So I wanted to show you this picture. I usually don't show this. This is one I use in my comparative anatomy lecture. Just so you can think of an idea of why our pelvis is shaped differently than an animal that walks on 4 legs. So if you're sitting here, so this is without abductors. So since my comparative anatomy people are sitting on the front row, so do you guys want to tell me what this abductor is right here? You guys said here, that was a mistake. You're close. That's it. This thing. Yes. Who said that? Okay. Great job, guys. I'm disappointed. I should just quit teaching now. So it's your glutes. So whenever you think about it, an animal that's walking around all 4s like this, they're essentially moving their legs in this direction. But now we have a leg that's underneath our body. And then we pick this leg up. These muscles on this side, your glutes, have to contract because otherwise your hip wants to fall in that direction. And so we have to modify that. So over evolutionary time, that's what's happening. So when we look at a chimp, so here's a chimp facing you. If you feel at the top of your waistband, those bones that you feel there are called the ilium. So that's these things. And this is the same thing in chimpanzee. And you can see the chimps, whenever they're walking, they're suspending their organs underneath them. Okay? So they don't have to worry about having abductors and things like that on the outside. They essentially just have to have muscles on the back. So their glutes are on the back, ours are more on the back and the side. But when we look at ape-men, what's interesting is they start to move in that direction. Even at 3 million years, we're walking on 2 feet. And if you were to look closely at this, and we were to measure these, chimps are facing essentially straight side to side. These are beginning to move around the side, and when you get to modern humans, those ilia are facing around so that you can actually touch them on the front. It's because of that walking on 2 feet. We need to balance on one leg because these muscles out here are contracting to keep our hips from falling when we're walking like people. These things change over evolutionary time. The foot. So most of you will not think about this, but if you look at a foot, a chimp has an opposable big toe, just like this. They can pick up things, grass, they climb trees. If you look at a picture of a chimp climbing a tree versus us, we typically put our feet like this and grab a hold of the tree. They hold it like that, and they hold it just like we would with our hands. So they can climb trees. But once we start walking on 2 feet, we need to shift the toes. So when chimps walk, so you can see on the right-hand side, or let's see, yeah, your left, that chimp foot there, when they walk on the outer portion of their foot. When we walk, we set down our heel, we walk on the outer portion, and then the last thing we touch is their big toe. And so we needed to move that big toe in line so that we have sort of more stable 2 feet locomotion. And so we can reconstruct this from bones, and we can make hypotheses about when this happened. But it's fantastic the way that some of this stuff actually happens. We have fossil footprints. And what's great about these fossil footprints is we can date the lava that they're found in. So this is in Laetoli in East Africa, around the same time periods of the stuff that I saw. And what happened is there was a volcanic eruption. And the wind that erupted put down a layer of ash. What happens that makes this significant is the layer of ash has potassium in it when it's first laid down. And over time, that potassium radioactively decays into argon. And you can look at that ratio and tell exactly that was 3.6 million years ago. And what's even more interesting is you can see that the big toe is moved in line. There's still a little bit of space there, but our toe is already migrated and moved in line to where our toe is. It's not like that, but you can see it. And this, I wish I could talk more about this, but just if you want to look it up, it's a site called Laetoli, L-A-E-T-O-L-I. And if you look here, you can see a couple of sets of footprints. There's lots of footprints of different animals that were walking through this as the ashes laid down. But one of the things, as you can see here, is the large set of footprints, and another small set of footprints. So it's essentially a male and female, so a family of these 8 men walking across this savanna after the ashes been laid down. Then some of those large footprints, they're smaller footprints. So you can see their offspring actually just like us, 1 million years ago, walking in their parents' footprints during this action. And so we begin to piece all of this stuff together and find out that when we look at our evolutionary record, so again, 100,000 years ago, we have essentially 8 men that dominate us. And again, the mosaic set of traits. So legs that are different than chest, cut in the middle, we have hips, we have shoulders, all of these things are changing. But after 2 million years, things begin to evolve very quickly for us. So between when we split off from chimpanzees and the time period that I'm studying here, there's 3 to 4 million years. So essentially the same amount of time between us now and these 8 men. So we've evolved a lot. But what was the driving force for those? Well, they started to diverge. So that 8 men either gave rise to more 8 men, and these 8 men we call robust. People use the thing for robust as built or differently or whatever like that. It just means they had bigger muscles associated with their face. They're the same size. These 8 men are roughly 3.5 feet tall, so they're really short. They're even baboons around the same time. They're as big as these things. You imagine our ancestors being on the savannah with baboons with canines this big, trying to compete with them, and so we had to find a way to adapt. And so our lineage went in one direction, eventually leading to Homo erectus and then Homo sapiens and the other species in between. So what happens is they begin to adapt and find different strategies for fitting into their environment. Ours went in one way. We call this a gracile ape man. It just means a lightly built. It doesn't have those musculature associated with chewing hard food objects and things like that. Then you have other groups. So when I said that in SWARTKRANS we had evidence of 2 species at the same time, it's these 2. So Homo erectus and essentially a robust ape man. And they behaved in different ways. Tool use probably goes back before our ancestors with chimps, because when you look at chimps do a lot of things with tools. And they amaze you at the amount of things that they do and their behaviors. So they were probably using tools that were perishable. And so what happens is we have 2 different ways of adapting to a drying climate. Because around this time, the world's getting much colder, and as it's getting colder, you're locking up more of the water into the poles, and then it begins to dry out in places. So grasslands begin to spread. So they're adapting to that new change in the environment. So what our lineage began to do is start to make tools. And I used to teach during explorations course on human evolution. And students would actually try to make stone tools. I learned a hard lesson. It was one of my first semesters here. I had a student, I thought, oh, this is safe. It's on, and everything else like that. People don't realize how sharp stone is. So I had a student who decided he was going to take a rock and throw it like a baseball and try to break it into smaller pieces. He had to get 7 stitches. And I was like, yeah, we're not going to be doing stone tools anymore. But it's still something interesting. Whenever you try to make something, I'm such a perfectionist, I start out with this big cobble, because that's what that is. It's just a river cobble that's been rolled and it's nice and round. And they preferentially picked up different types of stones to make tools out of. And then you start banging rocks off of it. When you look at the earliest tools, they just knocked off a couple of flakes. And you think, well, what can you really do with a flake? Well, we have cut marks on bones in the same time period, going back. And there's some sites before this, but this is around roughly 2.5 million years old. It's the most secure one that we, as a field feel comfortable with. You can see these scratch marks, and that's a sort of zoomed in 40 times magnification of the bone. You can tell that was a cut mark. We actually find cut marks on top of carnivore chew marks. So that means that our ancestors are getting to a carcass after other animals start eating it. So there's this debate. Did we start out as scavengers, or did we start out as hunters? Because when we think of stone tools, most people think of arrowheads and spears. That's so far down the line. What they were doing at this point is they were taking flakes, and even with one of these simple flakes, some of the faculty members I studied with in Indiana, they found an elephant that had died of natural causes, and they butchered the entire elephant using this technology. So you can get a lot of meat from an animal just using simple flakes that you're knocking off. Okay? So that's what this is showing. You're taking one rock, hitting it with another rock, and you're essentially carving things up with those flakes. And as they dull, they knock off. And so we began to specialize in making tools that were a little bit more persistent and hardy that we could use for lots of different things. Now at SWARTKRANS, we also have tools that are made out of bone. In order for these fossils to preserve, it has to be a special case where there's very low oxygen. And so we actually have many, I think I want to say many, it's about 70 or 80 bone tools, things that were used for some purpose. And rather than just hypothesizing what they were used for, we set out to do experiments and say, wait a minute, were they digging for tubers? Potato-like things that modern people in that area still eat? Were they digging for termites? Because if you look at chimps will go out digging the termite mounds and supplement their protein by that, or ants or termites want, and they'll essentially bite that stick, and then the chimp will lick them all off of there and eat that. So we get sources of protein. There's people in the area, the living modern people, who still eat worms and honey worms and things like that. So we're very good at getting as much out of the environment as possible. So we sat around to do experiments and took these bones and did different experiments. And what we found out is there are multiple use tools. They weren't specialized. They were used for many different things, again, trying to get access to food. And it looks like they were being made by those robust Australopithecines, because the only place we find bone tools are the places where you have robust Australopithecine sites. So sites in East Africa, sites in South Africa, it's only robust Australopithecines. And when they disappear, this technology disappears. And so it looks like they're going in one direction, using these perishable tools for, again, getting access to some protein or plant material. And then we're going in another direction of getting access to meat, large packets of calories. And if you think about it, a gorilla chews leaves and chews leaves and chews leaves, and they pretty much spend their entire day eating leaves, but it's because it's poor nutrition. If you look at us, we can eat a steak and get huge chunks of calories in a small amount of time. So there's different ways to adapt. And so what we have is, just to orient you, for you have an anatomy, this is a modern human. And this is their bottom jaw, so this is your mandible. This is your wisdom tooth, your third molar. This is your second, your first. That's the same three in these robust Australopithecines. And you were talking about things that are 3.5 feet tall, but the size of their teeth are about 225% larger than our teeth, their surface area. So it means they were probably eating things that were very poorly nutritious, so they had to eat lots of it and had to process it very quickly. And so they were adapting and eating using these tools. You can see this is experiments of using termites and things like that. Some people a couple of years ago had said, well, you could really supplement your diet eating termites. Being a scientist I am, decided to say, well, wait a minute, how many calories could you actually get out of one termite? You think about animals, literally, insectivores that are eating termites, how much of their day do they have to spend eating termites? And they were saying, well, you could get calories, the same amount as eating a quarter-pounder lunch steak, but eating so many termites. You can do this. And I calculated it was like 50,000 termites. And I don't know if you've ever tried to catch termites, but they're not easy to catch. And so it's not likely that this was a major source. It was probably a supplement or something else like that. So you have one lineage that's specializing in using these bone tools, eating termites and other things. And then you had us that began to use tools and access to meat, slicing off pieces of meat, the joints, perhaps even bone marrow. So inside of the shafts of our bones, or yellow bone marrow, that's very calorically dense. It's just fat inside of it. And so we see this sort of divergence. And so what happens is around the same time as stone tools appear, there's another site that's 3.3 million years old called OLDOWAN, but a lot of people are kind of not sure because it means that it's this, before these apians, so Lucy's age, making stone tools, and there's problems with the way the site is formed, whether it's actually 3.3, because it's complex the way these sites, water rushes through and you lay down new sediment and it looks like it's of a particular age, but it's just new material that's washed in. And so we need more information to really see if we can push this number back further in time. But you can see what happens to our brain. As we start using tools of different varieties, we're changing essentially the access of calories to our brain. Our brains are most expensive organ. It spends about 20% of the calories that you take in a day. And so as we're accessing meat, and again, this is where those crude stone tools, the OLDOWAN stone tools. So these things appear. You start adding a little bit of meat to your diet. All of a sudden, you're starting to use a shoe-in, so these hand axes, more meat in your diet. And we do this. I mean, there's so many things that I don't do that people do that are interesting. If you want to determine how much meat these guys eat, you can actually get strontium and calcium out of the fossils, and you can look at ratio of how much we eat versus plant material. And you can even figure out whether they're eating grasses or other types of plants as well. So you can look at the ratio of these things for both. So just giving you a cursory sort of example of these things. When you see Homo neanderthalensis, and you see us, and if you look at Neanderthals, one of the things you may notice is that their brains are larger than ours, but it's because they live in Ice Age Europe. And any of you that organism me or somebody else probably when you talked about it, the reason we don't have bacteria the size of this classroom is because it would be hard for that bacteria to meet its nutritional needs because you increase the surface area, but not in proportion to the volume that's beneficial. And so in this case, Neanderthals had big brains because it didn't lose heat very readily. It lost heat very slowly. So you look at modern humans, and Inuits or Eskimos are the ones with the largest brains. So large brain doesn't mean necessarily intelligence, it's other adaptations that go along with it as well. So what you see is that you have these different adaptive strategies. You see that some groups change or adapt to their environment in ways because the selective pressure is pushing them to do so, and they become extinct about 1 million years ago. So that means for roughly 1.5 million years, our ancestors would have seen something that looked more like us than a chimpanzee out on the savannah sharing this sort of environment with them. But they went extinct, and then we are the single sole species out of all of this bushy evolutionary tree. We're the only ones surviving. So when you hear people talk about races and stuff, in biology, our race is a subspecies. And there are really no races. We are one single species, Homo sapiens, because we are the only ones that survive or else like that. Race is a cultural construction. These things that we talk about again, trying to divide people into these segments. But every one of us traces an ancestor back to Africa about 200,000 years ago. Okay? So we're moving in this direction, becoming human. And it's this meat eating and other things that are driving and tool use that are driving our evolution. So what I want to finish with, before I get to my life lessons that I've learned from APE-LIKE, is to remind you that anatomy is mosaic. So that whenever you look at evolution, because again, my dad, until the day he died, said biblical creation stories, the way it happened. 6 24-hour days, 6,000 years ago. Well, that can't happen if you don't have this amount of time. Evolution can't happen in 6,000 years. You saw how many dots it took for us to get from the Heaton to essentially modern times. And so, and we didn't appear all of a sudden, poof, we look like modern humans. We started out, so from the waist down, we look like humans, modern humans. From the waist up, we look like chimps. And then bits and pieces changed over time. And then behavior begins to impact our anatomy. It's getting to the point now where we're doing things to our body that we're not really adapted to. So the modern human diet, the industrialized diet, has been around for 50 years. McDonald's fast food diet has been around for 50 years, and our body hasn't adapted to that. So we're very good at storing calories, but it's because we used to have times in our life as hunter-gatherers where we didn't get enough nutrition. So our body needed to be good at doing those things. And so this behavior, the way we act, also impacts our anatomy. Things like that. People always ask me, what do you think we're going to be like in the future? Those things are difficult to predict. So we get to my life lessons. So in these things you think, well, wait a minute, what life lessons do we get from studying fossil humans? And again, I could have ended up in many different careers, but this is where I ended up. And these are things that I think are things for you to walk out. If you remember nothing else, these are things that I think that you should leave here thinking, well, that makes sense. But it's because I have a different time perspective. I don't think about what the latest celebrity is doing on Twitter or anything else like that. Because in the grand scheme of things, and there's 100,000 dots, it doesn't matter. We're here for a short period. And so the lessons I've learned is don't compare yourself to other people. And that's hard because I grade some of you guys. And then you sit there and go, oh, God, I did so bad. It doesn't matter. You've got to be the best that you can be. Essentially, you start out at a different place than somebody else, and you end at a different place. When I started college, I wasn't a very good high school student, so in college I started until I got my act together and then essentially moved on. You have to figure out what it is that makes you be you, and essentially do it to the best of your ability. Don't worry about what somebody else has or anything else, because it doesn't matter. And then do what you enjoy. So if that means smashing rocks together, you be the damn best rock smasher you've ever seen. And just do it. And enjoy yourself. And the last thing is, don't be afraid to evolve. Because some of us get to the point in our life where we think, this is my identity, this is who I am. But those people that don't evolve and don't adapt to new conditions in their environment simply go extinct. You become miserable in a sense, in our case. Because you're stuck in a place and you're thinking, I deserve better than this, but I'm afraid to change. You can't be afraid to change. You have to evolve and you have to adapt to your conditions. So the last lesson that I'll leave you with is enjoy your time, because our time here is short. Long enough because that's one of my favorite pictures in South Africa. I just randomly drive around in the neighborhood where I stay, and I got to the intersection. It's like, wait a minute, which way do I go? No, I picked the right one. Oh, let me show you one other thing. So I had something else. So we, in BSC, before I take questions, we are always talking about forward effort. And so I thought, well, wait a minute, this is good because we're thinking about the future, but it doesn't really take into account our past. And so I decided to come up with a new thing for BSC. Forward effort, think about your past and the past of others. And we're to create a better world. Push yourself to be the best you can be. Never give up on your dreams. Have a positive influence on these people you encounter. And grind your best. But because academics love shortening these things, it's just BTEC. And that's even hard. So I just decided, forward effort. Sorry, I've got all these jokes. I'm like, can I work this in there? So I'll take questions. We have a little bit of time. I didn't have a clock, so I kept trying to look at my watch. But I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability. If you have any questions. Yeah.
I know this is not your area, but I kept looking. We've had modern chimp next to APE now. What would proto-chimp of the same time period look like? Would it be dramatically different from modern chimp?
Well, that's the thing. So when you look at chimps, each one of these lineages have their own evolution.
Right.
And so we think that the proto-chimp would look more like a bonobo than it would the common chimp because they had their own evolutionary history.
So they look at the bonobos that time.
Yeah. So, and the problem is, well, bonobos and chimps live about 2 million. But bonobos and chimps can still interbreed.
Right.
Well, we think the common ancestor looks more like a bonobo. So characteristics: slender limbs, the legs, the arms not as long, things like that. Of course. But the problem is because they live in a forest, and you have all this leaf litter and decaying material. They don't preserve. The oldest fossil we have is a chimpanzee is 700,000 years old.
Do you think consciousness was a product of evolution, becoming self-aware? And if so, why do you think no other animal, especially the ones close to RGO, ever developed?
So what was the first part of that?
Do you think consciousness is like a product of evolution? And why did no other animals, even those close to our genome, become conscious or self-aware?
Well, they do. So I don't want to blow your mind, but they do. I don't know if I could pull it up. I'd be afraid to try to pull it up on the internet. But look at, there's a movie called Monkey in the Mirror. And if you can't find it, let me know. But people have done studies where they've actually shown, like if you take a small child, and I don't know what age it is that it happens, if you take a small child and put them in front of the mirror and they don't understand, well, wait a minute, that's me, and they try to play with it. You put monkeys in front of the mirror, you do the same thing. You put chimps in front of the mirror, and they'll do it for a little bit, and then something clicks, and they realize, wait a minute, that's reflection. And they do these paint tests. They'll paint their foreheads with a color that pink or something else that's not normal. And then the chimp will go back to it, and they'll start picking the paint off, and they'll start cleaning their teeth and looking at their butts and things like that. And then they've done that with elephants. So, things that are so far removed from us. And so a recognition of self is something that's, in a lot of these groups, especially social animals or drugs like that. But they'll put elephants in front of the mirror and do the same test. They'll let them play with the mirror for a long time, and then essentially they'll go back and they'll paint on one side of their head with water, paint the other side of their head with white paint, put the elephant back in front of the mirror, and the elephant will walk up, and the first thing it does is start trying to wipe off the white paint. And so other animals have this consciousness. It blows my mind. This is, again, not my field, but we had a speaker here about 2 years ago, Fonz Ball, who's in Atlanta. And I think, how do we get at these answers? Like, how do we understand fairness? What is fair? Do we understand the intentions of other people? Me understanding your intentions and what's going on in your life is a pretty complex thing. And they take these capuchin monkeys that haven't even shared an ancestor with us in 30 million years. They put them in cages and then let them see what happens when they're treated differently. And it's amazing at how they behave. While people are thinking about depression, let me see if I can find the video real quick. Because it's one of the best things I think I've ever seen. Okay, so the ball is not working. We're just gonna see what this is. Okay, well the projector's not working, so I can't show it to you. So if you'll email me, I'll send you a link to it where it's like that, but it's one of the funniest things I think I've ever seen. How's that? Well, both of them. Well, The Monkey in the Mirror is a movie that's a full-length movie where it's like a famous made in the 90s or something. But if you just put elephant ear test or something, you can find these cases where they'll put elephants in front of ears and test it. If you put in Heaton fairness study, you can find a 2-minute clip. There's a whole TED talk on it. There's a 2-minute clip. And just watching them, whenever, because they give them cucumbers. And these guys will eat cucumbers all day, and they're giving them like, I'll give, the preacher's like, I'll give you a rock, and then you give me a cucumber, and they'll sit there and do that all day because they love cucumbers. But if they give one of them a grape, which is a preferred choice, and the other one sees it, and loses it. It's hilarious. So animals do understand. We're beginning to learn a lot about how animals behave, and whether they understand consciousness and attention to others. It's pretty complex. Any other questions?